Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm joined by James Chin Moody. James, how are you?
Very well. Great to be here.
Excellent. Looking forward to this conversation. We had a brief chat prior to jumping on in our first meeting, and there was some very interesting points which I do want to cover. So, really looking forward to this one. Do you want to give us a bit of a rundown about yourself and who you are and what you do?
Yeah. I'm originally an electrical engineer. I actually started my career building satellites, which is quite ironic since I now do nothing to do with space and all to do with e-commerce and logistics. But at the very heart, I think I'm still very much a complete nerd and really I'm very passionate, I think, about how you can create systems and how you can create actually change. I now run a company called Sendle. We've been going for about 10 years now. And what we do is we do small parcel delivery with a real focus on small businesses. So if you're an e-commerce seller, if you're an Etsy seller on eBay, or you have a Shopify store or any of these others, what we've done is we build a service that's 100% for you to send your parcels to anywhere in the world.
Excellent. During COVID, I had a little side business and we actually used Sendle. So door to door was fantastic. Didn't have to go anywhere. So as a previous user, I can attest to the service. It's an awesome idea. And especially going up against some of the big players, fantastic.
Yeah, well, this is what we found. It was really interesting before we started. Most people don't realize that we actually have a function monopoly in place, which is called the Post Office.
Yeah.
Australia Post, and why the reason why it's invisible in some ways is because it looks like there's lots of competition, but the moment you zoom into, everyone sending less than 20 parcels a day or whatever, they have over 85% market share.
Oh, wow.
It's enormous,
crazy,
enormous, and we often think that one of the things I've come to realize that a monopoly that's actually wrapped in a habit becomes completely invisible. And so there's this invisible monopoly in Australia. What we realized was that if you can apply technology the right way, there's a huge amount of infrastructure there. You can create an alternative for small businesses and a way for them to get cheaper, better, and also more sustainable 100% carbon neutral parcel delivery.
Excellent. I want to take a step back before we dive further into that. I know at age 17, you trained as a cosmonaut in Russia. I think everyone wants to hear about how that was and what did you get from that? What did that teach you about ambition and I guess risk taking as well?
Yeah, well, I was. It's a funny things. I still, as a father now, I'm quite amazed that my parents let me go to Russia way back then, just after the Cold War had ended. But yeah, as I mentioned, I was a complete space nerd, and I actually went to a thing called the Australian International Space School as a student, and I was in my first year of university, and I found out about the fact that the French space program were bringing some citizen cosmonauts to Russia. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want to do that. And so I didn't come from very many means. My parents didn't have much money, but I fundraised like mad and found a way to get over to Russia it was 3 weeks of cosmonaut training with the French space program in Star City, Moscow,
Wow.
Which was incredible. And we got to basically do every single thing that you would imagine, other than go to space, unfortunately.
Yeah,
I haven't done that yet.
Yeah, that would have been awesome. Did you learn much from there? I'm sure you did, but what were some key takeaways?
Look, I think I learned a lot about Russia at that period, but I think for me, that was the thing that did give me a strong passion for space. I do remember, and it's funny, but it was actually the beginning of my passion for the environment. I remember sitting there with a cosmonaut who had just come back a week after. We were having a barbecue with them a week after they'd arrived back on Earth. And the biggest thing, and I still remember him saying to me, I said, what do you recall? What did you learn in space? And I still remember him said, when you're face to face, you do not see the face. And I said, what does that mean? And he said, well, we're all here on planet Earth. We do not see its true beauty. It's too close to us. But when you're out there, you actually get to see the world. And I do think you realize that we're all on one spaceship. We're all, the layer of that spaceship, the atmosphere layer, and which sustains us all, is pretty thin.
Yeah.
And if you talk to most folk who do work in space, you realize that a lot of them are very passionate about the environment as well. And that was actually the thing that started me. I then became more involved in the environment movement. I ended up chairing the United Nations Environment Program Youth Council, for example. And that, funnily enough, took me, then to really part of the environmental mission when we started the company that then became Sendle. Really, it was there to try to make things see their full lifespan and do it in a way which reduces its carbon impact on the world.
Awesome. I know you did your PhD as well, and in engineering, I believe. Do you find that passion for the environment started was it involved when you were doing your PhD? Did it come after, or has it just been since day one? There's always been that passion for the environment.
Yeah, I was doing work in the environment movement way before the PhD.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, it was actually a PhD that turned into innovation theory and looking at how technological change actually occurs. So yes, it may be, if I didn't have my nerd badge before that, I definitely got my nerd badge after. But really, and I think, back to systems change, back to the way in which you get, significant, lasting, long-term change, you can't, often that requires an understanding of the system. So, for example, in the innovation space, that is about, it's about understanding what brings about technological change. And if we can nerd out for a second, there's only 3 ways that you get technological change. You either get changes in technology, which is pretty obvious. In other words, somebody invents, I don't know, a mobile phone. Or you get changes in market. So we all decide that, hey, we prefer to text rather than call, right? The technology was there before. We just decided that we preferred asynchronous communication to synchronous communication. That's a market change. Or funnily enough, the third one, which is actually where even most change and even more change than the other 2 occurs, is actually what they call institutions. It's the ways in which technology reaches market. And that stuff can be built on firm structure. It can be built on regulations. It can be, I think a really great example is the fact that adoption of mobile phones in America lagged the rest of the world by a couple of years.
Wow.
Because the way they did their phone numbers at the time, you couldn't tell whether or not you were calling a mobile phone. So anyone in Australia, it's an 041 whatever number. In the US, it was the same number. And so the receiver had to pay the cost of the mobile phone.
I see.
And so nobody gave out their phone numbers because if I'm getting a number, I'm paying this extra cost every time somebody calls my mobile.
Yeah.
And so just that choice around how you were going to actually do mobile phone numbers and institutional change, no change in technology, no change in market, actually had a huge amount of impact on technological adoption. And that happens all over the place. So, zooming forward, yes, when we think about Sendle, for example, we're often thinking about, well, how does this fit into the market? How do we, again, we think we've got some amazing technology that opens up logistics, makes shipping faster, better, more affordable in particular. But actually, in many cases, there's these sort of other hidden institutional issues that we're trying to battle.
Yeah, excellent. I actually did not know that America was one of the slower adopters.
Yeah.
Who would have thought that?
Isn't that funny?
Yeah. Rewind now and you wouldn't think that at all.
No. And again, eventually, because at some point, mobile phone calls became basically the same as a normal, and that issue went away. But it just reminds us continually that, some of these architectural choices, some of these things that you don't think are going to be a big thing can actually become a really big thing.
Yeah.
And particularly when they're about how the system itself is built.
For sure. I know you've also co-authored a book. I'd love for you to explain the central message of the book. And do you feel the predictions have held true?
Yeah. So building on innovation theory, there's a particular sort of corner of innovation theory which is looks at what they call long waves of innovation. So these, when I mean long, we're talking about 50-year to sometimes 70-year sort of cycles. And since the Industrial Revolution, we've actually had 5 of those. So these long waves, the first was milling, and then we got steam, then we got to electrification, Then we got to mass production, and then we had this wave of information and communications technology. And so my book was all about the sixth wave, building on some of the things I'd learned in my PhD and other things around the environment movement. I was working at CSIRO at the time. And I think the central thesis of the world of that book was, really talking about a world where you're decoupling economic growth from resources. And those resources are either, environmental resources or indeed, one of the big concepts I talked about was around digital natural convergence, that everything in the digital world has a natural counterpart. Sorry, everything in the natural world has a digital counterpart and vice versa. And I think it's interesting. Yes, absolutely. The trends that we saw in that, I nerded out around about business models on, absolutely coming true. Yeah. We're seeing, for example, renewable energy, the cost of that, the cost of batteries, everything driving down. I think the big one that we're now seeing, and again, if I was, writing it again, this is like 10 years ago, I think we're still, the digital natural convergence that's also happening is not just in the environmental space, but again, AI is absolutely, we're starting to see the digital natural convergence and, around, in some ways, not just knowledge, which is really what the internet was all about, but about thought. And that's going to change everything.
For sure. It's interesting to see. And the mass adoption of AI as well, just everywhere, small business, big business, it's huge. And it's awesome to see that the everyday person can tap into it and have access to it.
Yeah, I think and there is a really good analogy there. For example, you do get, I talked about technological change before. You do get these platform technologies that come in, and AI does, and a good analogy here is electrification, right? Electricity, when we started, it had a very limited use case or whatever. It might have been used for a light, but soon we're finding all these other things, so many things you can do with electricity. Like there's very little that everyone does in their day now that doesn't often involve something to do with electricity, and it became this platform. And I think we're going to see the same way the internet, you and I are chatting over, and the next one of those other technologies, which was the internet. AI is another one of those, those platform spaces, a bit like electricity.
Where do you see AI in, say, 10, 20 years?
Gosh, if only I knew. I don't. Looking similar to well, maybe this is a good answer. The more mature a technology, the more invisible it becomes. So you think of the light switch.
Scary.
Most people are sitting here, and there's, if you're indoors, there is a light switch on the wall somewhere. Now, that is an incredibly mature technology. You don't think of it as a technology, but in order to be able to flick that switch and for light to turn on, it's not just the wires in your house. It is all the things that then that house is connected to. It's all the, the electric cables. It's all the energy generation behind there. It's all the things that ensure that when you flick that switch, that light turns on. There is a huge amount of technology behind that. Yet, from your perspective, it's almost invisible. It's just a light switch. And I do think that that's what happens as these same with the internet. Once upon a time, you had to dial in and you had to on your modem, right? It was all very visible. The internet is becoming sort of invisible. Eventually, in 10 years' time, AI becomes invisible. And so what does that mean, right? If we're starting to have advice or knowledge or, intelligent assistance, everywhere and around us, what does it mean? Again, that's the bit where, what does it mean when AI becomes effectively invisible and really built into lots of things? But that's, again, where these platform technologies end up going.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I've never actually thought about that, and it's so true. It's almost invisible, and that light switch analogy, it really does resonate. I've never thought about it like that, where you literally flick the switch, and there's just so much else that's happening on the back end of that, and all the infrastructure that's been built, and all the decisions into that infrastructure. So, super interesting way to think about it, and systems thinking for sure. I did a bit of research, and to share, so a community sharing platform. Prior to Sendle coming to fruition, what was the aha moment when you realized that Sendle had a bigger opportunity?
Yeah. So, I mean, we, back to Two Share, I was actually the primary carer of two young children. So Two Share, in some ways, we're going way back in time now, back to around 2013. And it was actually, it was a great business. Its purpose was to make giving really, really easy. So the idea being that I ended up having all these baby clothes, wanted to find a good home for them, as well as other stuff. Nobody really wants necessarily to buy a bag of baby clothes on eBay, but actually if I can, everyone's generally pretty happy to give it away to somebody else if they, if it's really, really simple. And so we'd actually built this entire platform to make giving easy, but it turned out the thing that made giving hard, the thing we really had to solve was delivery, right? Again, back to we're nerding out technology. Here's another technology that's invisible but so bloody awesome. Think about this technology. You get to go and every week you get to put your rubbish in a bin, stick it out the front of the house, and it disappears.
Yeah.
Like again, everyone just imagine the technology that has to be done behind that, the movement of the rubbish, the safe disposal of the rubbish, all that sort of thing. That is a technology. And what we realized is that was what we were competing with for many household objects. And so how do we make giving something away as easy as putting it in the bin? The secret is to make the delivery, make the getting that item from one person to another really, really simple. And so Two Share started off as that. And it was, in some ways, you might say, a giving platform powered by logistics. The aha moment was really what happened is we were going along really nicely. We had 50,000 people giving things away. It was actually eBay sellers. And I'm going to be eternally grateful to these eBay sellers who actually jumped on. What they found out was that here was this really interesting way of doing deliveries. So just imagine, it'll be, I will sell you this on eBay and then I will actually pretend to give it to you on what we built.
Yeah, wow.
And we were like, why are they doing this? And the simple reason is because, and it's still the case, if you want to send 10 kilograms from Sydney to Perth, right, you can line up at the post office and pay $45 or we'll pick it up from your door for 20.
Yeah.
And that was the sort of, and it was that sort of saving, that order of magnitude of saving that we'd actually created. And that was the reason. So effectively, as eBay sellers who told us that we had something bigger than we had, and fast forward another 6 months, we'd separated it out as its own little service that could be used by eBay sellers, Etsy sellers. We called it Sendle. Within a month, we were doing more volume on Sendle than we were on Two Share. Second month, we doubled again. And the rest, as they say, is history. And in the startup world, you sort of say, well, we know which one's the rocket ship. And so we put all of our resources to Sendle.
Yeah, excellent. When you were pivoting from Two Share to Sendle, it involved shutting down a pretty large community of users. I think it was 50K roughly.
Yeah.
How did you make that call? And what advice would you give people that are faced with a similar, I guess, inflection point or pivot that they have to make in their business?
Yeah, it was really, it was very hard because also we'd put a couple of years of our life into this business, and its purpose was wonderful. Like again, helping items see their own lifespan. So, and in true honesty, we actually tried to run both of them for a while. Could we? And it was, let's be really smart. We can have a marketplace, and we'll learn from the marketplace and so on. I think a couple of things though made us decide, or almost if you think about it as sort of requirements. The first was I actually had a very one of our board members was great, and he actually said something which I think resonates very strongly still, and it's a big lesson for us. It was like, if you chase two rabbits, you don't catch either. And in a startup, the only thing you have is time and speed. And if you're not careful, if you chase two things, you're just not going to catch either one of them.
Yeah.
We sort of had effectively, it was sort of two teams. There was one person in particular who was in charge of, trying to make Two Share grow. You also have the problem if you have two businesses and one grows much faster than the other, you're automatically demotivating half the team. Yeah. So it was like, we got to the point we have to choose one. But then to get to that choice, I think there were two things that really made the choice for us. One was, this realization that yes, if you're in a gold rush, be the one to sell shovels. So let's just not power our own marketplace. And there were other giving marketplaces. Give.it is a really good one. So it wasn't that we were alone. It was like, we could help other marketplaces, or we could help eBay, and we can help reuse. But the bigger thing for us was, let's make sure that our purpose as Sendle was just as powerful as the purpose of 2Share. And that was when we decided to become a B Corp. So we were Australia's first technology B Corp. Our purpose really is, we realized our job is to help all of those small sellers out there, right? Our job is to help them thrive. Our job is to, if you think about it, small business is actually the real lifeblood of the Australian economy. Like when a seller sells on eBay or Etsy or uses Shopify or on Vestiaire or on Depop or on all the others, right? When they're doing it, the money that comes to them is helping put food on the table. It's helping send somebody to school, right? Yeah. Like that's the bit of the economy that we want to support. And what we realize, they're also the ones who are paying more than they should for shipping. They're the ones who are getting, if they're not careful, losing business because of shipping costs to some of these really, really large corporate. And so that was the purpose we said, and we were happy. We said, we'll follow that purpose. And, again, it was a very, very hard and a very sad day when we had to shut down 2Share. But in the end, it's easier to say no to something if you've got a great big yes to say. Yeah. Say something to on the other side.
For sure. I know we have briefly touched on it, but what problem did Sendle solve that these big existing logistics companies hadn't really addressed or hadn't adequately addressed?
Yeah, well, what we found, generally, back to the market, what you'll find is that there's, when you're small, there's very little choice. When you're big, what you start doing is you start getting these big enterprise folks who are built for a different market, right? They're generally built to pick up a parcel and deliver it, pick up a parcel to a warehouse and then deliver it into a neighborhood, right? And their number, I often joke that, if you had 1,000 parcels at the top of Mount Everest every day, you'd have 5 different folk who want to sort of do the business for you. But if you have one parcel, every third day in Western Sydney, often nobody wants to talk to you, right? And so what we found is that there were these big companies, they'll deliver parcels to neighborhoods, but often the trucks would go back empty. And they don't necessarily want to be working with the really small folk. They don't want to do the customer support. They don't want to do the billing and collection. They don't want to, and so on. So for us, it was like, well, if we'll do that customer support, we'll do the billing collection, we'll help you fill your trucks on the backhaul. Not only is that more environmentally friendly, but it's also, let's do it at rates which are effectively marginal rates. And so that's how we got the price down. That's how we effectively think of it as a way of unlocking infrastructure that already exists in Australia. Combine the true might of all these small businesses into one, fill those trucks, and that's the way we can get a service that's better, cheaper than the incumbent.
Yeah, wow. What were some of the early challenges, especially going up? You were the underdog going up against AusPost. What were some of the early challenges that you guys faced?
Look, I do think that back to the biggest challenge, I should say, is, a monopoly wrapped in a habit is invisible. And a lot of folk, if you say you need to send a parcel right now, what will you do? Or, the next day, you trundle off to the post office, whereas we'll pick it up from you and send it the next, and it's a little bit like magic, it disappears from your porch one day and it appears in somebody else's porch the next, or whatever days it takes. So frankly, awareness, I think to your point, is really big. We were very fortunate. We talked to our community. Some of our folk who were giving things away on 2Share are still selling and using us today, which is pretty awesome. I do think that they say in the startup journey, if you knew everything you knew now, you'd not do it. And, some of the technical challenges, particularly once you get to scale, become, so fast forward now. Yes, we have and it's wonderful. We've sent parcels all over Australia. We've hit more than 80% of Australian households, we believe. Like, it's pretty amazing. I think we sent over 50 billion kilometers of parcels.
Wow.
But the really exciting bit is we've also seen that this model works in the US and Canada. So we're actually, are now larger in America than we are in Australia. We've sent a parcel, I should say, from every 3-digit zip code in America to every other 3-digit zip code in America. We now cover Canada as well. And so, again, actually you start getting into the orchestration of all of that. The way in which you do that has been quite a journey.
What were some of those challenges when you scaled internationally? I mean, it's a completely different market to Australia.
Yeah, I think it's scaling is not for the faint. Scaling is not for the faint-hearted. International expansion is not for the faint-hearted.
Yeah, correct.
But I think it's all about trying to work out what do you want to hold true, and then where do you need to change and learn, and markets. So I did get some really good advice. We moved there for a while. Like, there was one thing which, again, if anyone's thinking of expanding internationally, trying to do it remotely is very difficult, particularly for the very early stage. So you need people on the ground. I think that it's funny running a business. We're very particular about time zones. We pride ourselves on being very fierce around recruitment. We try to recruit the absolute best people. I'm so proud of the team we have, and then we try to make sure that the environment we create for them to do their best work is a good one. So, for example, if you have a company that runs over multiple time zones, you don't want everyone in the US working late at night. You don't want everyone in Australia having to wake up or working on a Saturday. And so, for example, we have what we call golden hours. Those are the hours where we actually say, if you want to have a cross time zone meeting, you have to do it in these hours, and free up time for folk to do deep work or have meetings in the same time zone. So there's all these things you have to start to take into account the moment you scale. Not just how do you win in the market, but actually how do you operate across multiple markets.
How was the first 6 months?
Well, we launched in the US in the end of 2019. And so you could probably do the math there. And the first 6 months were really, COVID hit and really hit around March. And you might remember, first there was this big, nobody knew what was going on, and then e-commerce absolutely surged. So, we were very, in some ways, we were very lucky that we launched before COVID. I think afterwards would have been almost too difficult. And then we actually rode a bit of a COVID wave. Now we also internally say COVID giveth and COVID taketh away in the world of e-commerce, because, that wave was also fraught with so many challenges around delivery and all that sort of thing as well. So, and then when you get to about 2022, it all then came off again. So what we did see is we saw a lot of small sellers suddenly selling more, but then a whole lot of new entrants, and then it all got really, really hard. So, first 6 months were, mad.
Chaos.
And at the same time, we were, we already had some of our team remote. We were busy moving everybody to remote at the same time, working out the new ways of operating in that way. So, like many businesses, it's pretty crazy. I am very proud of the fact, though, that we were the only carrier in Australia that did not go down throughout the entire period of COVID. We picked up parcels, and because of our network, because it's so flexible, it's something, if one particular depot suddenly had an outbreak, we actually just moved.
Yeah.
We could actually move around. So that was something we learned, is how to be nimble.
Yeah.
And how to be resilient.
You've described Sendle as the Uber or Airbnb of logistics. Can you unpack that for us and what that means practically? Probably piggybacks off that comment you just made.
Well, I think the thing, if you at the surface of it, it's really simple. We are a competitor to Australia Post. We don't, no bones about it. If you're using Australia Post and you would like to experiment or investigate something that, door-to-door delivery that's cheaper than lining up at the post office, we are here for you and we would love to support you. If you do go and lay it down, we also, the way in which we're doing that is we're trying to take the best out of what exists on the roads today. And that's probably where there is an analogy with Uber. We're not a crowdsourced business. There's probably the one thing where but again, if you think about it, you're transacting with Uber. Uber's there to solve the problem. Uber's there if something goes wrong, Uber and so on. And so in the same way, we are a, they call it in the industry asset light, but the key is we are taking full responsibility for every single delivery.
Yeah.
And working doing whatever we can to make sure it goes from A to B as smoothly as possible.
Excellent. We've spoken a bit about the carbon neutral and somewhat sustainability. Has that approach helped, or has it hindered the business growth for Sendle?
Well, I think we're very proud of the fact that every single parcel we've ever sent has been 100% carbon neutral. Wow. So, we did it. It's funny, one of our mantras was taking responsibility, and taking responsibility was not just, taking responsibility for when things go wrong, because things do go wrong in a delivery. Like, dogs exist, and, locked doors exist, and things can get in the wrong tub sometimes. There's all these things that can happen. So we needed to take responsibility there, but we also needed to take responsibility, we believe, for the carbon emissions. And it was something coming from when we were Tushare. We also did it to begin with. We didn't even talk about it, by the way. And so again, this is, back before carbon neutral, anyone was talking about being carbon neutral. We just did it. Yeah. What we find now is, absolutely. For some of our customers, it's really important. For them to be able to actually say, we're now doing carbon neutral delivery is great. For others, they don't care. All they care about is the fact that they're saving money. And in some ways, one of the things we're very careful to make sure we're doing is trying to make sure that everyone understands this is not about it. This is not trying to say you're paying a premium for a sustainable shipper, right? You're actually taking advantage of the fact that you're being able to fill in space in trucks, which makes not only the carbon intensity of the delivery lower, but actually we're going one step further and then taking the rest and making it carbon neutral.
Yeah,
and our customers get to be proud of that too.
Excellent. You famously, infamously, whichever word is correct, went head to head with AusPost in a trademark dispute as well.
Yeah.
Can you share some insights in that experience and how that all went down?
Yeah, well, you talked about awareness earlier. Bless them. So when we were coming up with our name, Sendle, one of the interesting sort of bylines that we thought of was, which we thought was great because it said everything, was post without the office. And the idea being that, again, saying, we'll give you the same service as a postal service, but we'll do it without all the gumph, and we'll do it door to door and so on. So post without the office, we thought was such a great way to differentiate us. So when we put in the trademark for Sendle, we actually put in the trademark for post without the office as well. And bless them, our dear friends at Australia Post disagreed, and they decided to take us to court and say that no, they thought we were being misleading. That post without, that they owned the word post, and no one else was allowed to use the word post. And sort of 18 months later, and it was really interesting. We have small businesses who stand up to big business every day. And for us, it was like, okay, well, let's stand up to big business. And 18 months later, the courts agreed with us that post without the office is there to not confuse, but actually to differentiate what we do. And talk about that there is an alternative. And so we won. The side effect of all of that was that what they'd done is a great job of drawing everyone's attention to the fact that we exist. And as a startup, that's pretty nice. So thank you to the dear friends at the legal team at Australia Post.
A win for the small guy. You frequently talk about falling in love with problems. Can you elaborate on what that means practically for small business owners?
Yeah, it's again, I've learned a few things on this journey, and because I was never a startup person before this, but one of the things I've learned is that it's often the thing that a great indicator of a success of your business is how painful the problem you are trying to solve is, and then how well you know that problem in order to actually be able to solve it. What I mean here is that sometimes, and I've talked to lots of founders and so on, sometimes the problems we're solving, and we've got to be careful, are just not painful enough as startups. But we were very lucky because what TwoShare taught us was a very painful problem. And as somebody who'd been giving things away, lining up at the post office and dealing with complicated shipping is a very painful problem, particularly if you're an online e-commerce retailer, right? Hey, I managed to navigate how to sell it online. Hey, I've managed to get my first sale. Now what do I do? Oh my God, I'm spending an hour a day, having to do all this sort of gumph, and now I'm dealing with tracking inquiries and all this sort of thing. So I think we were just lucky. We actually stumbled on a really painful problem, and then we'd spent 2 years, in some ways, experiencing the problem ourselves, dealing with it, trying to work out how to fix it. So, one piece of advice I've now, if you're starting a business, particularly if you're a startup that's trying to solve problems for others, you got to really fall in love with that problem. You got to really understand why that problem is a problem. How painful is it? What does the world look if you solve this problem? Like, that's all the stuff that gives you, in some ways, the more work you can spend on that, and the more honest you are with yourself, by the way, is this a painful problem? Is this enough to get somebody to really go, oh, there's a thing called the Sean Ellis test. I'm not sure if you've come across it, but it's, they ask a question. They say it's a really good leading indicator of product market fit. And the question is this: how disappointed would you be if this service no longer existed? Right? So you go to all your customers and you say, how disappointed would you be if your service no longer existed? And then all you do is you count the very disappointed, right? Not just disappointed, it's got to be very disappointed. The thesis behind that test is that if you've got to get at least 40%, right? In order of your customers saying, I would be very disappointed if you didn't exist, in order to have real product market fit.
I've never actually thought about it like that. It's so true. As a business owner myself, like, we get caught up in those little things sometimes, and it's just really important to keep the path and just prioritize those huge problems, those things that are going to really make that material difference. How do you personally manage your time to make sure that you are focusing on these big problems, especially being the CEO of a rapidly growing and expanding business?
Yeah, I think time is the only non-renewable resource, you might say, ultimately. I think, and time is the thing, like, if you think what kills all startups, right? It's not the thing that kills all startups, all businesses, frankly, is not lack of money. It's not lack of ambition. It's not lack of enthusiasm, whatever it might be. It's actually time. Time is the thing that means you run out of money. Time is the thing that allows others to catch up. Time is the thing that, might wear people down, whatever it might be. So you've got to use your time very, very wisely. Personally, we have a couple of things. I mentioned, like what we do with Golden Hours meetings. Meetings are a time sink. They're very useful. It's great to compress the meetings if you can. Doing things async is another thing. But again, being smart with your tools, like if you're using a Slack or some other method, working out how to make sure that you're switching things off if you need to do deep work. I came across this concept with our engineers, actually. One of our engineers shared it with me, this idea of manager time versus maker time. Not sure if you've ever heard of that, but yeah. Manager time is the meeting, context switch. Maker time is very different. That's where, like you say, I'm going to set aside 3 hours and I'm going to paint this painting, right? And your first 20 minutes is having a cup of coffee and thinking about it. Then you get in there, then you get in flow and you paint your painting, and then you come out. Now, the issue is if somebody drops manager time in the middle of maker time, right? You've suddenly, you're out of flow. And I think as a business, what that really means is you've got to coordinate. You've got to work out how do we as a business operate? How do we make sure that we're not everyone's in manager time all the time or whatever? Or again, you can do whatever you want. But I think that the real way to get stuff done is to have that balance between your maker time and your manager time.
Mm. How do you balance that? Do you block hours out? Is it just when you're doing deep work, you're just non-contactable? How do you manage that?
Yeah, I think you've got to be very fierce around your diary. And again, we have the added advantage of time zones that really compresses, and forces us to be careful with our time. But yeah, you've just got to be fierce.
Excellent.
I was going to say the only other thing is having some big yeses that you can say. Like I say, my inclination is to say yes to a lot of things. That's just my personality. And what I found is, and so I find it very hard to say no, but it's easier to say no if you've got a great big yes. So the other thing is, in order to say no to stuff, to protect your time, what you need to do is be really clear on the things you're saying yes to.
Yeah, for sure. What advice would you give to other founders that are trying to scale sustainably in their business without greenwashing?
Yeah, I think the first is, greenwashing in particular. I'd say this for every business, whether or not you're trying to talk about your environmental credentials or whatever. But firstly, you've got to be clear on your purpose. And you've got to be clear of how your purpose lines up with your business model. So it means that the bigger you get, the better you do, the more you're fulfilling your purpose. So here's an example. The bigger we get, the more small businesses we're helping, the more, the more kilometers of carbon neutral delivery we're delivering. We're showing the industry how to do it. It all lines up.
Yep.
If those two things are not lined up, that's when you start getting into trouble, right? You've got to do the work and understand how your impact and your business model aligns. The second thing then is, we've done this. You then got to make sure you're not drinking your own Kool-Aid. Like, we get third parties to validate what we do. We're often we create. We make sure we're not at the edge. We always create buffers. I think, for example, we look at a parcel as if it's gone from Sydney to Perth when we're looking at offsets. Like, things like that become really important. To again, not drink your own Kool-Aid, because I think that's one of the other things that can sometimes happen.
Yeah, excellent. We've briefly spoken about AI. How do you personally use AI tools? Is it every day? Is it once a week? How do you go about your day, and how do you integrate AI into it?
Yeah, I think a lot of us are all starting to find ways in which, whether it's just a simple query or otherwise. What I've realized is that the next big skill to have for all of us is prompt engineering. And so what I'm trying to do is challenge myself around how to write better prompts. It's funny to think that once upon a time we all sort of had to learn how to Google.
Yeah.
Right. And now what we have to do is unlearn or search. I'll say Google. Unlearn how to do that and learn how to prompt. And a prompt is very different from a search.
Yes.
But a lot of folk are still using a prompt like a search. You know what I mean? Versus, I'll give you an example. Like, and finding good use cases where you can do it. I had to do my taxes, recently, and get all my receipts into one place. And I realized that here was a great example of, an hour or two of drudge work where maybe I can spend an hour or two learning how to do something with AI instead and get the same output. And so what I did is worked out how to prompt something that would be, I got all the emails, the relevant emails, Google take out of them, and then taught something to basically go in there and read every single one of them and spit it out. into a spreadsheet that I could use, and which was properly validated, that I was comfortable, that I could then quickly review and then send off, right? Like that teaches, again, no coding involved, right? Zero coding in any of that. It is just literally working out how to do it and helping it teach you how to do it.
Yeah.
Which is even crazier.
Interesting example. I'm sure people are going to message us and send us questions about asking for that prompt, because it's something that a lot of our clients would love to do, because going through those emails to get the receipts for tax time can be very strenuous and time consuming. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Have you used platforms like Relevance AI and N8N? Have you had much of a look at those platforms with those AI agents?
Look, Manus is the one I've been.
Okay.
And yeah, look, I think that gets also even more interesting when you start to say, okay, big difference between the sort of your base AI is it's like you've got, I don't know, a graduate in a room, and they, you get to shove notes under the door and they get to answer based on everything they've learned so far. They can send you a note back, right? That's what it prompted. Versus an agentic AI where it's much more like, okay, now we're going to give them a web browser and we're going to go and give them a whole pile of other managers to, other folk who are going to, like, there's all these other things you start to be able to do in that space. So at least that's how I characterize the difference. I do think that there's, again, it's back to this whole question of like what, the capabilities that, again, the big difference between Googling and prompting is you also want to be starting to have a conversation with it.
Yeah.
Like, and it's, as because, it can actually also help you, to think about things and how you're going to divide this up and so on. The more successful you get around that stuff, right, the more likely you're going to get to an output. Otherwise, and by the way, you can get a lot of gibberish and a lot of hallucination, and you can be very disappointed, right? Some of this stuff is, can also give you complete rubbish. But if you can get it working and you understand what to do, then it can become incredibly powerful.
For sure. Looking back on your journey, what's been the biggest personal lesson that you've learned from running Sendle and any business, and I guess your entire career as well?
I think, gosh, there's lots of lessons.
Pick two or three.
We've covered a few of them already. Actually, here's one we haven't covered, and then I'll talk about two that we have. The first one is, choosing who you're on the journey with is as important as everything else. So I've talked about having purpose. Knowing your purpose is so critical for business, but the second critical piece is, who do you want to actually work with? Because often they're the ones who sustain you on that journey too. Your purpose sustains you, and your team and who you work with sustains you. And in the early days, it might be just you, or it's your network of people that are supporting you, but then the moment you're starting to recruit. So Sendle, we have what we call the 5 H's. These are the people that I love to work with. Might not work with everyone, but, and every single person has been in order: humble, honest, happy, hungry, and high performing. And I believe, again, I'm a total nerd, but those things cascade. Humility drives honesty. Honesty creates positivity. Positivity creates ambition. Ambition is the thing that then leads to performance in that cascade. So I think, I'm very proud of the fact that, we really have stuck to that, as a way in which we recruit, in a way in which we talk about culture, in a way in which, and again, we're not sort of a business that shoves that down people's throats. It's more like, it's just interesting. You can start to see behaviors, like let's be really high performing, but we're going to be more humble than we're high performing. Let's be really hungry, but let's be more honest than we're hungry, because that's where the derailing occurs. So that was one big lesson. Choose wisely around, who you're on the journey with. I do think that there is something, when I think about a lot of small startups and small business owners, it's like there really is this thing about you can't chase two rabbits.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes if things are not working, it might be because we're not doing enough. It could be because we're doing too much, or we're trying to chase too many things, and so you never know which one's going to work, or you're not putting enough. Sometimes success is about applying pressure to the same place over and over again until eventually you get through. It's not this linear thing, right? But the hard part is when do you know?
Yeah.
Right. And so the better thing to do is you gotta sort and test. You got to sort quicker than anyone else, and you got to sort better than anyone else and test quicker than anyone else. Right? Becoming really good at sorting and testing, and that requires focus.
Yeah. Excellent. I always think it's just like making those quick decisions, being able to make those decisions and learn from those decisions as well, because we don't always make the right ones. It's just being able to make them faster. That's just something that I personally like to go by as well.
Yeah, it's funny. You need to do that for like 80% or 90% of the decisions, which is like, as you say, like you got to be fast, right? And then you got to work out when are those decisions the ones you need to be slow.
Yeah,
which is back to recruitment, right? Who do you hire? Who do you take money from? Which market do I pursue? So it's really interesting being able to be able to understand the difference between and look, Amazon's got a great way of talking about one-way doors or two-way doors. I think that's the real question there. If there's a two-way door, then you make it as quickly as you can.
Correct.
Right? But then really identify which are the one-way doors and then be mindful.
For sure. Where do you see yourself and Sendle in 5 years' time?
Again, our ambition is to basically, be the largest small business courier in the world. I mean, so we're going to keep on doing what we're doing with even more small business customers, with even more carbon neutral delivery, and we'll see, probably in even more countries. It'd be really exciting.
Excellent. What's one actionable takeaway that you'd like all of our listeners to walk away with after listening today?
I mean, selfishly, I would, of course, like them to make sure that they would realize that there is choice in the world of parcel delivery. But frankly, I think the actionable thing, again, I know you've got a lot of small business listeners as well. Again, probably the most powerful question you can ask yourself, because if you can answer this really well, it actually can then drive you, can drive a lot of the things. And just honesty is the purpose one.
Sure.
Like Simon Sinek says, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do what you do.
Yeah.
And, that's the thing. That's probably the action. If you can just spend a little time of thinking about that. Now, it could be as simple as I'm doing this because I need to put food on the table, and that's okay, and celebrate that. But in many cases, we're doing it for another reason.
Yeah.
And the clearer you can be about that reason and really tap into that, the more you will sustain yourself in your business journey, the more you will get people alongside you, the more you will engage your customers, the more differentiation your brand will have and your product will have. Yeah. Answering that question, I think, is a really powerful one.
Yeah, for sure. James, thank you so much for today. It's been fantastic, and I'm sure we could have gone for another hour. I really appreciate you coming on, and you're more than welcome to come back and jump on the Australian Business Podcast at any time.
It's been brilliant to be here. Thank you.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks for watching this video on the RAS Network. While you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get videos each and every day on business, finance, investing, and so much more.